It's time to crush the head. I'm Mitch. This is Johnny. We're going to
Shalom.
get right into it. Today we're going to have a guest on by the name of David Wilber. A lot of you may know him from 119 Ministries.
Um, okay, yeah, my origin story. I grew up in the Lutheran Church. That's where I was confirmed. So I took all the classes, and in eighth grade, I was permitted to partake in the Lord's Supper and all of that. And that's just where my parents took me growing up. But I didn't really have a relationship with the Lord. I don't feel like until a little bit later. I grew up believing in God, but it wasn't really until my sophomore year of high school, I think it was, where a friend of mine invited me to his Baptist youth group. And his youth group was, they were doing all sorts of crazy stuff to reach out to the youth in the community. They did like this thing called Friday Night Fever, where they had concerts. They would bring in like Christian rock bands and stuff. And so they were really doing a lot to reach out to the youth. And around that time, I was really into music. I was playing guitar and writing songs. And so obviously, that really resonated with me at the time. And I thought it was really neat to be part of that. And so he invited me there. And at one of those events called Friday Night Fever, I heard the gospel preached from the stage, and for whatever reason, it just really hit me in a way that it had not before. It really resonated with me, and it impacted me. And I really grasped the depravity of my own sin. I really grasped the meaninglessness of life without God, life not serving God. And that just felt really meaningless to me. And and so the gospel message that I heard preached that night just really touched me in a way that it had not before. And so it was that night that I really felt I truly gave my life to the Lord. And so that was at a Baptist church. And then so after that, I was attending that Baptist church for all throughout high school. I was doing music there, playing in the worship band and all of that. And it wasn't until a couple years after that, I think I was around 20 or 21, where I got introduced to messianic theology, like things of the Torah, the law of Moses, the Sabbath, and stuff like that. Um, it was actually a person I knew, an acquaintance who was at the Baptist church, and he was teaching an apologetics class there while I attended at the Baptist church. And I've always been interested in apologetics. Even before I was a Christian, I was really interested in debating people and arguing theology. Well, not theology before I became a Christian, but arguing about all sorts of topics. And when I became a Christian, apologetics, of course, became something very crucial to my needs at the time, having to defend my faith to my friends in high school and stuff like that. And so the guy there that was teaching the class, he and I really hit it off. We kind of lost contact for a while though after high school. But one day, a Jehovah's Witness came to my door. And this was after a time when I had kind of fallen away a little bit. I mean, I still believed in God. I still considered myself a Christian, but I wasn't really living for the Lord. I had gone through a lot of heartbreak up until that point, and experienced a lot of just some betrayal, and I was sort of um, kind of, yeah, just kind of struggling with my faith a little bit. But I was wanting to get back into things and wanting to really serve the Lord again. And a Jehovah's Witness came to my door um in the midst of all of that. And for whatever reason, this was not the first time a Jehovah's Witness or a Mormon or whatever had come to my door, but for whatever reason, it felt kind of like a divine appointment. Um, I I knew that Jehovah's Witnesses were wrong, but I did not know why. And so that that desire within me to debate and to argue theology and all of that, that was instantly reignited at that point. And so I scheduled a meeting with the Jehovah's Witness a week later, because I just felt like this was a divine appointment, that God sent this guy to my door, because this is, he wants me to minister to this man. And so I dedicated that whole week to learning everything that I could about Jehovah's Witnesses, getting right back into apologetics. And I remembered that acquaintance that I had at the Baptist church who taught apologetics. And so I reached out to him, and he was leading a Bible study. And at that time, he had started getting into some messianic theology. He was getting into the Sabbath and the dietary laws and the festivals and things like that. And so he was teaching that at his Bible study. And he invited me to come to his Bible study one night. And so that's what I did. And when I went to go, when I went to the Bible study, that is when everything just really clicked for me. I've always had questions about things like the Sabbath. It's like, okay, we Christians say that the Ten Commandments are important, but why not the fourth commandment? Why is that commandment not really emphasized or highlighted at all? But in churches, well, growing up, and also in my youth group, throughout high school, I just sort of shelved it because I trusted my pastors, which it's not wrong to trust your pastor, but I just sort of took their answers as, well, okay, these people have studied this more than me, so they must know what they're talking about. So I never really heard another perspective, but it was something that throughout high school, I know I'm kind of going all over the place here, but that was something that has always kind of stuck with me. Questions like that, like what do we do about the Sabbath, the fourth commandment? What about the Jewish people? The Jewish people were God's people in the Old Testament. But now Christians are God's people in the New Testament, and how does all of that work? So I've always had questions about that. Um, and when I went to that Bible study, that was my first time really being exposed to another perspective. I heard that, oh, okay, the Sabbath is still relevant for today. And that is something that's a viable option to consider, right? I don't have to just accept that something changed. No, there are people that believe that the Sabbath should be kept. And so a lot of the stuff that he was teaching in the Bible study really clicked with me, and it really it made a lot of sense. Of course, I didn't just accept it without question. I went into the Word, I really studied it, and I've basically been doing that ever since. I'm 37 now, and so that was I was like 2021 when I first got exposed to that. And so yeah, I've been studying the topic ever since, and I'm fully convinced that commandments like the Sabbath and the food laws and the law of Moses, that those things are still valid and relevant for us today. That's what I spend a lot of my um, time researching and putting out content on. I've written several books. I've written one book on the Sabbath called Remember the Sabbath. The first book I wrote was actually on the feast days. The first book I wrote was called A Christian Guide to the Biblical Feasts, and that was just like a really short book talking about how to celebrate the festivals and stuff like that. But yeah, I've written several books now. The feast days book, I wrote a commentary on James. I wrote a book addressing feminist objections to the Bible called "Is God a Misogynist?" And then I wrote a book called Remember the Sabbath, which really focused on the Sabbath in the Bible and in history. And my latest book that I just came out with is a study on Matthew 5:17 through 20. And that's called How Jesus Fulfilled the Law. And so yeah, that's kind of what brought me to where I am now. Started out as a Lutheran, became a Baptist for a time, Jehovah's Witness, you know, got me back into apologetics, and that reintroduced me to a friend who reintroduced me, or who introduced me to Messianic theology, and that's kind of you know, I've been there ever since. Yeah, so I got married when I was 27. I'm bad with dates. I think that was, yeah, 2015. Um, so yeah, I got married. We have three kids. We have a 8-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a almost 4-month old. But yeah, they're a blessing. My wife and I, she was Messianic too, before we even knew each other. And so that was a huge blessing because we met each other and we had similar beliefs. And so we were able to start off our marriage and our family on that foundation. So my kids have known nothing else besides the festivals and Sabbath. Like we keep Sabbath every week, and so that is they don't know anything else besides that, and so that's just been a blessing. And my kids love the feast days. They love Passover. They love Sabbath. Of course, Sabbath is just such a huge blessing for our family because I am forced not to work, and so I'm a workaholic, and uh, it is great to be forced to get out of that, and that's something that I think I need. And so, but my kids love it because they're like, Daddy can't work. He has to spend time with us. And so they really look forward to it. My family attends Founded in Truth Fellowship in South Carolina. And Pastor Matthew Vander Els, he's the senior pastor there. Yeah, it's wonderful fellowship. There's a bazillion kids there. And so it is perfect for our little kids because, like I said, we have little kids, and so we're just are so blessed to be part of a community that has similar beliefs as us that our kids can grow up with other kids their age believing the same thing, and so that's something that's really important to us, and so. Yeah, we're blessed to be where we are. I do teach on occasion there. And that's always a blessing to do that. But yeah, our pastor Matthew Vanderels, he rock. I always get a lot out of his messages. So yeah, that's an interesting story. So I've actually known those guys for a long time, John Sherman and Steve Mutria, who is he used to be involved. I've known both of them. They actually went to the same Bible study for with me for a little while, and so I met them there, and so they were. So I've known them for a long time. I'm friends, good friends with the graphic artist that works there. He's the guy that does all the graphics and the video stuff. So I've been friends with him for a long time, and basically, Steve had left for a few years, and it was really, I think John was pretty much the only teacher at the time, and he wanted to bring on an additional teacher, or someone just to kind of help with research and writing, just to keep up with the content production for the ministry. And so Josh, my friend who does the graphics and stuff, he thought of me and he brought the idea to me. He's like, "Hey, we're looking for someone, and this might be something that you'd be good at." And yeah, he basically brought the idea to John, and I had a meeting with John, and he basically hired me on the spot to do research and writing scripts. And so I started off as a contractor doing that. And basically I just did research and wrote scripts. And then after a while, I think like after 6 months or so, they decided to actually bring me on as a teacher and have me, in front of the camera and all of that. But yeah, that was, gosh, I think back in 2018, the beginning of 2018 when I got brought on with 119. When I just started as a contractor for 119, um, that was uh, yeah, I was just kind of looking for ways to, get more hours. And so I was already doing research and writing scripts. And I knew how to, since I had already put together a few books, self-published. That was an idea I brought to John. I'm just like, hey, you have all of these transcripts from the Pauline Paradox series. Why don't I just kind of wordsmith these a little bit and put it together in a book? But yeah, that book it's mostly John. I mean, I think John was primarily the writer behind that series, and so that was mostly his research and everything, and writing that went into that, and I just kind of came in and made things a little bit more concise and wordsmithed things here or there. So I helped with it, but I would say that John's, primarily the brainchild behind that one. So Matthew 5:17 through 20 is just the bomb diggity. It is like the passage for Torah observance for Christians. I mean, that is because it's like okay, um what he directly answers the question. So if you start with the question, it's like okay, um does the law of Moses still apply today? It's like Jesus literally answers that question. That is the question he answers in the passage. And by the way, that is like widely agreed upon. I cite some scholars in the book, but it's like the consensus is that yeah, if you want to know Jesus's position on the law of Moses, Matthew 5:17 through 20 is where you go. Now, they don't all agree on what his position is, but they do agree that if you want to know his position, this is the passage you go to. Uh, so um, yeah, so that is I figured that I want to write a book on dealing with the question of does the law of Moses apply today, and so I wanted to talk about that passage. Um, but yeah, I have a publishing company called Pronomian Publishing, and we publish books from all sorts of authors, and we started a series called Pronomian Pocket Guides. And basically, the series is all about each book is like a short book on a passage that is relevant to the question of Torah observance and things like the Sabbath and the food laws and stuff like that, and whether they apply. So we have a book on Colossians 2. We have another book on Acts 21, another pocket guidebook. And so I decided to write my pocket guidebook on Matthew 5:17 through 20. And I just figured I would do a short book, just exegeting the passage. And I also have like a little appendix in there where I answer some objections as well. But yeah, I just we started that series, and I thought it'd be worthwhile to have a book for that series dealing with Matthew 5, and that's just kind of how it came about. I've spent a lot of time studying that passage before I wrote the book, obviously. I did spend quite a bit of time on it in my previous book as well, the book on the Sabbath. And so I just kind of took all of that research and what I've already written and expanded on it, and just kind of put it together in a book. So yeah, I think it took me like just like 6 months to write it or something like that. I knocked it out pretty quick. Yeah, but yeah, praise the Lord. A lot of people have said that they've been blessed by it, and so it's a blessing to hear that. Actually, there's a really great paper on this. I started a website, torahmatters.com. So the website, I put out a bunch of papers by various scholars that kind of promote a pronomian perspective. Uh, if you go to that website, in the Gospels and Acts section, there is a paper by Logan Williams called "The Stomach Purifies All Foods." And it's a recent paper that was just published in New Testament Studies, but put out by Cambridge. And it's a phenomenal paper. And it will probably change the scholarly discussion on that verse, on that chapter of Mark. Even people that disagree, they will still have to reckon with what Logan Williams put out there. But the basically the idea is that in Mark 7, you have this confrontation with Yeshua and the Pharisees, and it's a confrontation over ritual purity. The question is, why do your disciples eat with unwashed hands, hands that are defiled? Because they viewed that, if unless you do these ritual purity washings, these ritual washings, your hands will contaminate the food, and when you eat the food, that food will contaminate you. And so the even if it's clean food, even if it's like bread or whatever, they just had this tradition. It was called a tradition of the elders that eating food with unwashed hands brings defilement to you. And so Yeshua is addressing that question: why do your disciples eat with unwashed hands? And he goes on and talks about how their traditions suck because they cause them to break the commandments of God. And you know, so he's automatically contrasting the word of God with their traditions, and he's affirming the word of God. He's saying you're breaking the word of God. And so he's condemning the Pharisees for breaking the word of God, for rejecting for rejecting the commandments. It would be very strange for him to then do away with some of God's commandments. If he's condemning the Pharisees for breaking the commandments and rejecting the commandments, it would be very strange for him, Yeshua, to then say the commandments don't matter anymore. So automatically, like on the face of it, the antinomian interpretation is already something's not quite right there. Okay, so how do we deal with this passage in verse 19 though? Because in verse 19, Yeshua, he's talking about what you eat, it goes into your stomach and it goes out into the latrine. And then there is this weird clause at the very end of verse 19 that is usually translated into English as a parenthetical statement that says, "Thus he declared all food clean." Okay. And so that is usually taken as a parenthetical statement from Mark, basically giving an interpretation of Yeshua's teaching. That's how it's usually taken. And so there are reasons to doubt that, though. Well, number one, but before I get there, even if we accept this common English translation, thus he declared all foods clean, it's still situated within a context having to do with the traditions of the elders, a question concerning whether eating food with unwashed hands defiles you. And so, even if we accept the traditional translation, all he is saying is that eating food with unwashed hands does not defile you, that the food is clean. God cleansed all the food, and so it doesn't defile you. Um, thus he declared all foods clean. He declared all the food that the Pharisees are saying is defiled. The Pharisees are calling this food defiled because you're eating it with unwashed hands. Yeshua is saying, no, he declared all foods clean. It's not defiled. And so, even if we take the traditional translation, it still does not lead to the conclusion that antinomians want to take you to, that Yeshua is doing away with the dietary laws. But I think there's a better translation, and this is based on um, Logan Williams' article, is that the phrase in Greek that is typically translated as "thus he declared all foods clean," the phrase literally is, if you just translate the phrase literally, it is cleansing all the food. And so that raises the question, okay, because that's a very weird statement on its own. It has the participle cleansing. Like, okay, that raises the question: who or what is cleansing all the food? And so what translators have assumed, many translators have assumed that Jesus is the subject of the participle cleansing. And this goes all the way back to the previous verse, Mark 7:18. And you have the verb he said, and the implied subject of that verb he said in verse 18 is referring to Yeshua. And so translators assume that, okay, this participle must go back to that that verb he said, and so the subject of that verb is the implied subject is Yeshua, so Yeshua must be the subject of the participle cleansing. And that is where you get this idea that this is a parenthetical statement. And there's a bunch of technical reasons for that. In Greek is like a gendered language, and so words like participle has to match its antecedent in case and in gender. And so it's very, according to conventional Greek grammar, the nearest antecedent to cleansing is that verb he said in verse 18. And so you have that implied subject, which gives you the translation, thus he declared all foods clean. But there are other reasons to doubt that. The number one, it would be very strange for the participle to reach back 35 words to the verb he said to modify that implied subject. And so that is very unusual for a participle to reach back 35 words. You don't really see that in Mark. That's uncharacteristic of how he writes. That's just uncharacteristic in general. And so already that translation choice is very strange. Um, and Logan Williams actually writes, I pulled up the article here. He says, this would be the only instance in Mark's gospel in which a participle follows direct discourse while also modifying the main verb of the clause which came prior to that discourse. And so in Greek, yeah, it's already very awkward. And so what Logan Williams proposes is that the verb actually um, modifies the previous phrase. It's actually connecting back to the phrase, basically where it says, since it enters not his stomach, his heart, but his stomach, and is expelled, cleansing all the food. And so the person whose stomach is you know the person whose stomach is eating the food, he is the subject. The person is the subject of the participle cleansing, and so the person cleanses the food. It gets worse for the antinomian because Peter was the one who helped Mark write his gospel. He was the source of Mark's gospel. So Peter was the one who was, telling Mark about everything that was going on, and he was the one that told Mark about this encounter that Yeshua had with the Pharisees. So yeah, that would be it would be very strange for Peter to then not have any clue about what Yeshua had, said. Just a little while later, it would be very strange for Peter to then be like, "What? You want me to eat unclean food? Like what? What in the world?" So yeah, that reaction does not make sense. But yeah, it gets a lot more interesting because this translation that Logan proposes, Logan Williams, is that it raises the question of, okay, like, well, what does it mean for the person to cleanse all the food that he eats? The person's stomach. What does it mean for his stomach to cleanse all the food that he eats? And it seems that Yeshua is kind of playing off of the Pharisees' logic here. And he's because if you look at a lot of the Jewish literature, unanimously in the Jewish literature, they did not view excrement as ritually impure. So you have in Deuteronomy, you have laws that you're supposed to go outside of the camp to do your business, right? But it says that it's detestable, but it's not the same word. It's not ritually impure in the same way that a corpse is ritually impure, or in the same way that leprosy is ritually impure. And so the Jewish literature unanimously, without exception, says no, excrement is actually ritually pure. So what I think is going on here, and this is something that Logan Williams argues, is that he's playing off their logic and basically saying like it comes out of you ritually pure. So how could it defile you? So that's his whole argument. Is like if it comes out of you ritually pure, it can't defile you. It's the same thing like when if you have leprosy or something and you wash you're cured of the leprosy, or a better example, maybe like you were intimate with your wife, right? And so you're ritually impure from being intimate. um well, you would need to wash, and 24 hours you would return to a state of ritual purity. So when you wash, does the water that you wash with become ritually impure, or does the water cleanse your ritual impurity? So in the same way, if what comes out of you, if the excrement that comes out of you is ritually pure, uh, according to unanimous Jewish tradition, everyone agrees that excrement is ritually pure. If it comes out of you ritually pure, then that must mean that, like the baptism water, your stomach purifies the impurity. So even if the food, which is clean food, by the way, according to the Torah, they weren't eating swine, as we already established, but even if the food is considered ritually impure by these Pharisee standards, even they would have to admit that it comes out of you ritually pure. So your stomach must function to cleanse the food of impurity. So it can't defile you. Just as impurity cannot defile water for from the baptism. And so that's what I think is going on there. And once you kind of see that in its cultural context, it just makes a whole lot more sense. I mean, especially makes more sense than the antinomian interpretation that Yeshua condemns the Pharisees for breaking God's commandments, and then he goes and does away with the commandments. That would make him a massive hypocrite. But yeah, it just, I think it just ties everything together really well. And so yeah, his article is very good if you want to get into the scholarship on that. And he quotes like a lot of passages from the Septuagint that give parallels to like if you're interested in the Greek grammar and everything. He quotes several passages from the Septuagint that give parallels, parallel grammatical structures to what we see in Mark 7:19. And so it's not based on nothing. There is a grammatical case to be made there for this alternative translation, which I think makes a whole lot more sense than the traditional view. I want to mention one more point on this if you don't mind. But the so most scholars believe that the Gospel of Matthew used Mark as a source. So the Gospel of Mark was written first, and then Matthew, he used Mark as a source. And Matthew also talks about this confrontation with the Pharisees. And what's interesting is that um, at the very end of Matthew's account, he basically he retells Yeshua's teaching, and then in verse 20 he says, "These are what defile a person." Talk about adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false witness, etc. These are what defile a person, but to eat with unwashed hands does not defile anyone. And so Matthew takes it right back to the issue that was being discussed, which had nothing to do with clean and unclean food. It had to do with this question of eating food with unwashed hands, and if that defiles you, according to the Pharisees' traditions, if Yeshua agreed with that tradition. And what I think is going on there is I think Matthew is actually clearing up the ambiguity that could exist within Mark. He is retelling Mark's account, and he's clearing up the ambiguity there to make it crystal clear that just so nobody misunderstands what Mark is saying, this has nothing to do with clean and unclean animals. This has to do with a question of ritual purity and specifically the traditions of the elders. Yeah, so I think that's an important point as well. It really depends on the person. It really, not everyone's the same. It just really depends on what their goals are with the interaction. I mean, my goal, I try. My goal is to get to the truth. I mean, that's what my goal at any time I interact with anyone on a scriptural topic. I want to get to the truth as much as possible. And so that's what I try to express to people. I believe that what I believe is true, obviously, otherwise I wouldn't believe it. Um, but yeah, it really depends on the person. I find that most normal people are pretty receptive for the most part. Like they're willing to hear your side and be persuaded. Um, there's some people that will get more defensive uh, just because I think this is a problem, for a lot of people, not with this topic specifically, but anytime you're challenging like a popular belief, there is a tendency in a lot of people to kind of get defensive because it's like if you grew up in a church and maybe you got saved at that church, and so much of your identity is wrapped into that community and your pastor's teachings, and all of that's very good. It's good. Community is great, and I certainly there are many aspects about my upbringing, particularly in the Baptist youth group throughout high school, that I've greatly cherished, and I'm so thankful that God provided some of those foundational things for me. But yeah, there is a tendency to kind of get defensive when you're presented with new ideas that kind of go against the grain of tradition and what you've been taught. And so it really depends on the person. There are some people that may be a little bit more insecure in their beliefs, and so they get defensive. There are other people that are a little bit more open and willing to hear what you have to say. And then there are the antinomian teachers who don't care about what you have to say. They just want to argue and use you as to make content on their YouTube channels, and misrepresent your position so that they could use you as a foil or whatever for their video. So there's those folks as well, and there's no reaching them because they already have they already have their opposing Torah observance as kind of their meal ticket, and so there's no reaching them, but it's still valuable to interact with them because all of the people that listen to them, it's still valuable. Um, I think it's in Acts 18, right, where you have Apollos, who he is debating the non-believing Jews, the Jews that did not believe in Yeshua, and he's debating them, and it says that he powerfully refuted them in public, and this greatly encouraged the other Jews that believed. And so the other Jews that were witnessing this, that were hearing the debate, they were encouraged by Apollos refuting these other Jews. So Apollos, even though he did not convince the people he was debating, he was able to greatly encourage the people that were listening. And so that's sometimes I know I'm kind of going on a tangent here, but that's something that I think about even when I'm interacting with someone that it might feel like a waste of time because you're never going to convince them. There still could be some value in it because number one, it could convince other people that are listening, and number two, it could encourage people that agree with you. There could be people that are inclined to agree with you, but they're struggling with certain points or questions, and it can strengthen their faith and give them more confidence in what they believe. And so there's a lot of value in interaction and debate and all of that. And like, yeah, it just kind of depends on the person, what their goals are, what they want out of the conversation. And, and you just, people are going to decide, that there's something I said recently. I posted it on X, formerly Twitter. I said that, um, yeah, people are going to, yeah, it was something along the lines of like people are going to believe what they want anyway. So your job is just to present the best case you can. May the best exegesis win, put it out there and let the people decide. Something like that. Much more eloquent than what I'm trying to express now. But yeah, people are going to decide. Don't let it get you down if people reject it, like people reject really good arguments sometimes. And so that's just the way it is. And so, yeah, our job is just to put it out there and people will do with it what they want. 37 now. I got into this at 2021. I've heard it all, man. I've heard it all. There's a lot of weird stuff out there. I mean, there's weird stuff in broader Christianity as well. I mean, I think that it's just I think because the Messianic movement and Torah observance, it goes against the grain anyway, that it is attractive to people who are already inclined, to go against the grain in other areas. And so, it does attract those people automatically. But yeah, so there are a lot of people pushing some weird stuff in the Messianic movement. Um, I think that I mean I'm similar to you, I think. I mean, I'm much more interested in uniting on the things we agree with, and I'm able to look past smaller things. I do think there is a little bit of a problem if people are just pushing absolute nonsense, because I think it's like a credibility thing. And I think it kind of ruins the credibility of the real message that I value so much, which is the validity of the Torah. I think that there's a problem with that being discredited um, by people that advocate for that while also pushing weird stuff that's just nonsense. But yeah, I mean, I'm able to look past a lot of things. I like what you said. WTF? What's your focus? What's the focus? Uh, yeah, I may have to steal that. Um, but yeah, I'm friends with all sorts of people. Like I've been in this movement since I was 21, and so I know people that get into all sorts of stuff. And some of the kindest people I know are they have beliefs that are pretty fringe in some areas, but they love Yeshua. They walk out the commandments. They love their family. They help people out, and so yeah. What's your focus? And I think as long as you're keeping the main thing, it is what it is. My main concern, like I said earlier, is I do think there is a danger of discrediting yourself when you're pushing nonsense, because that could really hurt your witness. And I've seen that happen. I've known people that they're not even willing to look at the Messianic movement because of bad experiences they've had, where people were just pushing nonsense, and they're like, oh, you guys are a bunch of crazies, like I don't want to have anything to do with you. And so I do think that that's a problem. And so there is a need for sound teaching and theology and doctrine. There's certainly a need for that. Uh, but I mean, we're people, right? We're gonna have there's gonna be some eccentric people getting into weird stuff, and we're still called to love each other, and we uh, do the best we can to walk alongside each other and glorify the Lord as best we can. I think there's definitely we're just so privileged to live in the United States, because we have the option, we have to be able to influence elections and to be able to have a choice in who will represent us and who will lead the nation. Not all countries have that. And so we're definitely very blessed in that we get to do that. And I don't see anything in scripture prohibiting us from having a voice in the political system. I think there are some passages that we can point to that would encourage us to do that. I think of Jeremiah 29 specifically when the prophet is speaking to the Babylonian exiles, and he tells them, even when they're in exile, they're part of this foreign country. They're under foreign government. And what does the prophet tell them to do? He says, get married and have kids. He says to build houses, to plant a garden, to succeed uh, economically, and to seek the welfare of the city. He says to seek the welfare of the city. And I think that's pretty profound because he's talking about Babylon there, right? He's saying, like, while you are in Babylon, seek the welfare of the city. That means do your best to make sure Babylon is as good as it can be while you are here. And so I think that there is a principle that we could derive from that in our own situation. I mean, we don't live in a, theocracy. We don't live in a you know under a government that seeks to honor God in everything it does. But we do have an opportunity to have a voice. We do have an opportunity to influence the types of leaders we do have, and I think that's worthwhile to do. I think that is implementing the principle of seeking the welfare of the city, where we are. We can have a voice to make Babylon, so to speak, as good as it can be while we are here. So that's what I do. I participate in I vote every 4 years, and in the midterms too. But I've always been a Republican. In 2016, I just did not trust Donald Trump. I didn't think I thought he was full of it. I thought that he was a liberal in disguise. And I guess I was one of those never Trumpers or whatever. Like, I'm a never Trumper. Well, that didn't end up being true because I voted for him in the last election. But I just thought he was full of it. I did not believe that he was a genuine conservative, and so I didn't vote for him. I voted third parties, some guy I don't even remember the name of anymore in 2016. Um, but yeah, I didn't like Trump. But he won, and I'm really glad that he did win. And I really liked a lot of his policies. I still did not like him as a person. I just continued to think that he was just a terrible person. Yeah, so I didn't like his character or anything. But I mean, that was just me watching. I bought into a lot of the media narrative and all of that. But 2020, I reluctantly voted for Trump because I agreed with his policies. I thought that he did a good job. And he was obviously way better than Joe Biden. Um, but yeah, I voted for him in 2020. But then in this last election, 2024, I enthusiastically voted because number one, he was a bazillion times better than Joe Biden. And come on, we learned over the past 4 years. So they were terrible, terrible last 4 years under them. And so anything would be better than another 4 years of that. And so that was a big motivation for me voting for Trump enthusiastically in 2024. And I agreed with his platform. I think that he was promising some really good stuff. I liked a lot of what he did when he was president, and so I voted for him. And I think that it has been awesome. He like they have hit the ground running. They're doing a lot of really great stuff for the country. So yeah, that's just kind of where I'm at. I'm not, I'm not an expert or anything. I do follow politics pretty closely on X and everything. I big fan of Elon Musk and all of that. But yeah, I think they're doing some good stuff. Well, I think the first thing to point out is that it is not required. It's not demanded that we do it. Having said that, I do think that it's beneficial, and I think it's very good to do it. We celebrate 4th of July here in America, um, and that is not required either, but it's something that very significant event in our history. And so, in the same way, Hanukkah is kind of like the Jewish 4th of July. I mean, it is a miraculous story of God delivering the Jewish people. And if obviously, if it had not been for that miraculous deliverance and the Maccabees being able to get the temple back and get you know fight off the Syrian Greeks, if it had not been for that, Yeshua, wouldn't be here. That like Yeshua was born out of the Jewish people, and so yeah, very significant to our history as believers, obviously, for all of that to have happened. So it is kind of like on the level of other times in the past where God delivered His people. So yeah, it's I think it's important. An important history at the very first and second Maccabees and learning about the event. That doesn't mean you have to play dreidel. That doesn't mean you have to make latkes or have a uh, light the Hanukkah or anything like that. You don't have to do any of that stuff, but I do think at the very least it is worth learning about because it was such a significant event in our history. Our history as followers of Yeshua and Jewish history as well. And so, yeah, I think, yeah, that's kind of my take on it. My family does it. We love Hanukkah. We go all out. My kids really love it. And yeah, it's just the theme of the holiday, I think, is something that is very relevant to our lives as believers because the theme is all about standing up for what is right against all opposition. And so the Maccabees, they're like, their entire culture was like saying, you cannot study Torah, you cannot circumcise your kids, you cannot keep the Sabbath. You must eat pork. You must sacrifice swine on the altar. That was the culture pushing them into that. They were trying to erase God's commandments. They were trying to erase those aspects of who God's people were. And the Maccabees stood up and they're like, no, we're not going to. We're going to stay faithful. We're going to stay faithful to these commandments, and we're not going to let you erase who we are. And so I think that that is a very important message, and of course that's a major theme of the holiday, but it's something that I think that we need to hear today, because the culture is constantly trying to pressure us to compromise and to give up the things that are important to God so that we can fit in or whatever. And so yeah, so I think it's important. I think that it's not required, but it's worth doing. I did give a sermon recently on the topic. It's on my personal YouTube channel where I kind of talk about the meaning of the holiday and why it's important. If anyone wants to check it out. Yeah, no, those are modern traditions, and hey, you don't have to do them. I mean, we give gifts during the holiday. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I don't think um yeah, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with giving gifts. I guess I guess I would need to try to understand the rationale a little bit better, like why it might be a problem. Um, I think the only thing that I've heard is that it's Hanukkah and Christmas are usually around the same time. And so there is like a little bit of hesitation there because you don't want to just celebrate Jewish Christmas, right? You want to do something different. And so I've heard some hesitation in that regard because obviously gift giving is a huge part of Christmas. But I don't really think there's a good case to be made that gift giving during Hanukkah in itself is wrong. Um, the only thing I've heard is that because of the association, the similarities, but there's lots of similarities between lots of things, and that doesn't mean that it's wrong. I mean, pagans sacrificed animals, uh, but that doesn't mean that it's wrong for Israel, to go to the tabernacle and sacrifice animals. It's a completely different thing. For whatever it's worth, I would encourage you to do it. It's my kids love Hanukkah. It is actually kind of funny. My kids grew up celebrating Hanukkah. They never done Christmas or anything, so they have nothing to really compare it to. But they have friends in the neighborhood, like my daughter's best friend just right down the street. I mean, they celebrate Christmas and everything, and they're Christians. But my daughter one time was like talking about how the holidays that we celebrate just seem so much cooler than her friends' holidays that they celebrate. They're like, yeah, we got 8 whole days, and they only have one day. And so my daughter was really uh, just talking about how she loved the holidays that we celebrate, and that meant a lot to me, because I want the time that we have as a family and our own traditions that we do to be meaningful to our kids, and to for it to make a lasting impact on them. And I think that sometimes we can uh, and I'm not saying that you're doing this if you choose not to celebrate it or anything, but I think that there is sometimes we could deprive our kids of something that is beneficial.
Thanks for watching, and if you like the content, please give us a follow. And until then,
Crush the head.
Crush the head.